Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching, and a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. I hope you all have a great holiday season. Well, on Pennsylvania Newsmakers this week, employer penalties for the Affordable Care Act kick in just under a month, plus the problems continue for the Attorney General Kathleen Kane. How will Governor-elect Tom Wolf deal with the Republican-controlled Pennsylvania legislature? All that and more after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Welcome back to the program. Well, we'll get to the employer penalties on the Affordable Care Act. This is pretty important. We'll talk about the sign-ups. It's been out of the news, but it's still extraordinarily important. It affects millions of Americans. But first, we're going to have a little journalist update with Robert Swift from Times-Shamrock newspapers and Steve Esack with the Allentown Morning Call. Both cover the Capitol, both cover politics, both. You guys never mind. You get into all kinds of, you're covering just about everything that goes on. All right. I want to start with you, Steve. Big news again this week when the Attorney General of Philadelphia has now prosecuted two additional lawmakers in what is known as the sting after Kathleen Kane, the Attorney General, said they were not prosecutable. What's that about?
Well, I think Philadelphia District Attorney Seth Williams, he was the big news, in my opinion, out of that wasn't so much those two lawmakers that got caught up in that, in which he got a Philadelphia grand jury to agree that there were criminal charges. It was more of the figurative indictment he had against Kathleen Kane. He slammed Kathleen Kane, basically accusing her of fabricating the racial bias of the investigators at the time in his office, or in her office, who started this investigation under then Attorney General Tom Corbett, I believe. And then when she came into office, she dropped the case, and in subsequent interviews with the Philadelphia Inquirer, who broke this story, she alleged that she dropped it in part because it was half-assed is her word, and racially motivated.
Let's see if we understand this. There were four lawmakers, Robert, and a traffic judge who allegedly took money and gifts for favors from a lobbyist, that in effect...
So-called lobbyist, posing as.
Good point. Yeah. So-called lobbyist. Kathleen Kane said, the Attorney General, these are not prosecutable. She then, at his request, turned the cases over to the DA of Philadelphia. There have already been one traffic judge that worked out a plea deal for, if I understand it, one count of felony. Go ahead.
This extends, prosecutions of state lawmakers that started with Bonusgate in 2007.
Right.
But this is a new twist that this is something Pennsylvania has not seen before. It's a sting, whereas prosecutors set up the situation that these lawmakers walked into.
Right.
They've been doing this at the federal level for a number of years. There's the famous movie been out in last year about the ab scam sting of the 70s. But this is, for Pennsylvania, a new type of prosecution that now Seth Williams is advancing with these charges.
But I think the bigger point here, Steve, is that the argument was whether they were prosecutable or not. It's obvious now that at least in one out of the five there's a conviction, and we'll have to see what happens here. Now, these are allegations. We want to make that clear. But charges have been made against two lawmakers, correct?
That is correct. And these two lawmakers, if they plead to protect their pensions, or one of them pleads to protect their pensions, that's a notch on Seth Williams' belt, and it's a knock against Kathleen Kane as she seeks re-election in 2016.
And she's already announced that she will seek re-election. She did that at Pennsylvania Society Weekend. All right, Governor-elect Tom Wolf faces not just a Republican legislature, but a larger Republican legislature. We'll get into some of the issues that the new governor-elect might face back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, let's turn now to the situation that will confront Governor-elect Wolf as he takes office on January 20. Republican-controlled legislature, larger majorities there. I'm chatting with Steve Esack from the Allentown Morning Call and Robert Swift with Times-Shamrock newspapers. Now, Robert, you've been covering Harrisburg for a long time. This is not totally unusual. I mean, Governor Rendell faced a Republican legislature, correct? And,
right.
And he worked his way.
And he had to, what he learned is what these legislative leaders wanted was power. So Rendell,
that's new, right?
He ceded to get what he wanted. He ceded a lot of power, like a legislative supermajority on the gaming board in return for legalization. Republican votes to pass it for slots. He wanted an economic development bond issue. He gave them a supermajority on the board to oversee it. And that board has picked up more power and more programs. It's called the Commonwealth Financing Authority. And I think the current leaders still have an appetite for power because just before the lame duck, Senator Scarnati was moving a bill to put the redevelopment programs, about $300 million, into that, under the jurisdiction of that.
So in other words,
authority.
What you're basically saying is, if you're going to do all these community and economic development projects, convention centers, stadiums, whatever, the lawmakers want
dibs.
They want involved, just involved in the decisions. They want the projects as well. Is that
exactly?
And Rendell worked that out.
Rendell worked it out. And the one thing Rendell did say is that you have to know where to pick your battle.
Yeah.
Well, in Rendell's case, it was the funding for full-day kindergarten, early education programs, and that was the big budget fight of 2003, and that's what made the budget fight of 2009 go to Columbus Day.
Yeah. Now, the issues, let's just go through some of the issues that they face, and you can pick up on this. First of all, they have a $2 billion structural deficit, right?
Yes.
And the governor-elect wants to increase education spending, and he wants a shale tax.
Yeah, and he can't get if he does get a shale tax, and there's lots of Republicans and Democrats that are okay with that, he's got to protect that impact fee that Governor Corbett created.
That's the $200 million. That's the tax on each wellhead.
Yes. Okay. Well, maybe not in the same system, but at least that same dollar amount has to go to those.
About $200 million.
Yeah, has to go to those municipalities, and probably just those municipalities that actually are impacted, because a lot of that $200 million bucks, it's walking around money. Why does some of that money need to go to the Lehigh Valley? There's no wells there, for example, and that kind of.
All right, now here, the big news out of Pennsylvania society last weekend, in my humble judgment, was this. The new incoming majority leader, Senator Jake Corman, made it clear in a talk that if Governor-elect Wolf wants new revenues, he's got to do pension reform first.
Well, I'd say that's real brave of Senator Corman, because, he didn't give it to Governor Tom Corbett. It's not an election year, so now they're talking tough on pensions, because now they don't have to go back to all those municipal workers, all those teachers, and start saying they messed with their pensions, or they messed with the entire system of PSERS and SERS and that sort of thing. So if he's talking tough now about it, then why not? Representative Tobash's pension plan has been, it's the closest thing to most people agreeing to a system that would work, which would keep the existing system, SERS and PSERS, that the state employees and the school teachers are in, up to $50,000.
And then go to a 401k style plan.
Yes, above $50,000.
Go ahead.
If you're talking that and you have a nearly $2 billion deficit problem, where you have all these revenue sources disappearing, you're talking about a long budget summer.
Yeah, but look, you've been through a lot of these. Some deficits, and we're going to hear about this, you can deal with by pushing them off. It seems what we're hearing out of the Corbett administration is they've pushed them off long enough and they can't push them off anymore.
That was the message
right?
of Secretary Zogby, the budget secretary, the final message of him that you cannot do it without doing pensions. He said a tax increase at that point. This was right after the election.
Go quickly.
Real quick, that pension billing, that tobosh, it wouldn't affect that structural deficit in any way, shape, or form. That's just like future
Right. We're talking
money.
about decades down the road before those. All right. Pennsylvania lawmakers hiring consultants? I don't think so. Well, we'll find out after the break.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
Robert Swift and Steve Esack, both journalists, are helping understand what's going on in Harrisburg, in the state capital, that is. And Steve Esack had a story this week about lawmakers hiring consultants. I know Robert's written about that in the past. What's the latest with lawmakers hiring PR consultants? What's that about?
That is, under the House and Senate rules, they're basically representatives and senators can spend money on virtually anything that they want. And a lot of them, especially in the Philadelphia region, are using that unfettered ability to spend money on consultants. Those consultants tend to be public relations people that will try and get their name in the local press down in Philadelphia. The one example that we started the story with was State Representative Jim Roebuck paid a consulting firm $600 because that consulting firm helped get his role in a community theater play in which he played a corpse, basically a guy laying on a stage, as in a gossip column in the Philadelphia Daily News. There was several other examples of mostly senators using consultants.
Have you covered any of those?
Yes, in this, what's interesting about Steve's story is I read about these in the past, and you were thinking, we're not doing these anymore. They're fading out. Well, it still continues, and these are, and some of them were Republican senators who are continuing.
So both parties. You're basically saying you've written about both parties, right? Yeah. So it's not a party thing.
Right, both parties, both chambers. And
using
it's
some
also,
PR money.
You have to realize the extent and the amount of money spent on these public PR staffs, of people on the payroll there, of all caucuses, and the amount of PR that comes out of there. The fact that they need any consultant is ridiculous.
What you're saying is they have their own staff that can do that, but yet they do it themselves. We got about 30 seconds left in the segment.
And it's not just PR. There's over 2,400 employees that work directly or indirectly for these lawmakers, and they're hiring consultants to study transportation issues, to study budget issues, when they have vast staffs that are experts in this thing. It's a slap in the face, in my opinion, of the legislative employees, the people that come in every day.
I get it, and do all the work. Okay. Well, what a story to move on. We're going to talk about the Affordable Care Act. We'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
Well, we haven't heard much about the Affordable Care Act, but there's a huge decision that employers are in the process of have to make about, whether to provide coverage for their employees. Robert Gluss, he's a partner in Consulting Actuary with Conrad Siegel Actuaries. That's a long title. It's like you're not even a professor, Rob, and you got a long title. All right. You're Rob and I'm Terry. How's that? Yeah, we'll have fun. Okay. Look, let's go into this. We've heard a lot about this leading up to where we are now. Employers, certain size company, have to provide coverage. If not, get the checkbooks out. Do I have that right?
It's pretty accurate.
All right, go ahead. Tell our viewers what this is about and why they should care about this. Go
Sure. It's been a long time coming. This law was in effect 2010, and we're only now just January 1, 2015. Now, all large employers, if I have over 100 full-time equivalent employees, as of January 1, 2015, I have what's called the pay or play requirement, or the employer mandate. I either have to provide my full-time
pay or play.
Pay or play. I either have to provide my full-time employees health care coverage or risk potential penalties from the government. And there's a couple of different penalties. There's a lot of nuance there, but that's the decision employers are having to make.
What size company does this kick in? What's the threshold?
It starts this year for anyone who has full-time equivalent employees over 100 employees, and it'll start
100.
next year for any full-time equivalent employees over 50 employees.
Okay, so if you're under 100, you don't get the penalty and you don't have to provide the coverage. Is that right?
That's right. You get one more year.
But then it goes to 50. Now, the 50 to 100 seems, whoa. I'd imagine we have a lot of small businesses that have between 50 and 100 that maybe not supplying coverage or supplying partial coverage.
It's definitely a fair point. The smaller you get, the more likely you have some odd work situations where people are maybe considered full-time but not offered health care coverage, and that's going to change. Again, it may not necessarily change what an employer does, but they're now at risk for potential penalties, and they need to know what that exposure is.
Yeah, now one of the things that we've heard that have come up, particularly from the critics, is that this is going to force a lot of employers to take their full-time person, I think, is it 30 hours, and say, okay, you're going to work 25. You're working 35 or 40, now I'm going to make you work, or I'm just going to drop the coverage. But, I mean, you've got sort of two options that could occur. We're neutral on this, well,
Sure.
We're just explaining the facts. Is that completely out of the question?
Not at all. I mean, I do think there are a lot of people that have to evaluate their staffing requirements, evaluate how many hours people are working. And again, adding health insurance or adding potential penalties is going to be a big cost. So a lot of them are making sure if there is a chance people were going over 30 hours, they're just defining it such that, no, we're going to make sure that they're under those requirements. I'd see very few people are actually saying, oh, these are 35-hour people that we didn't offer health care before. Now we're just going to start offering them health care coverage. That's not a real normal response in what we're seeing right now. The bigger response is either try to cut hours a little bit, or maybe it's better, again, to drive people towards the marketplace.
All right, so let's walk through this. So a company employer could say, we're going to give you, can they say, we're going to give you X amount of dollars, you go and buy the coverage on the exchange, or does that only work for people below a certain income threshold?
Well, it's only really valuable for people below a certain income threshold because they're going to be the only people that are eligible for subsidies in the exchange.
I get it. So money from the federal government to augment their own, what they would pay to buy coverage. Is that right?
The issue that you're talking about, even there were certain plans out there that were offering, saying, well, I can offer you coverage. I'll just provide you a subsidy. You go into the marketplace and get a federal subsidy. The government, within the last couple of months, has come out and said, absolutely not. You cannot actually have an employer reimburse the employee for individual marketplace premiums and still get a federal subsidy. That's a big deal because it is certainly much more efficient for an employer to provide health benefits through an employer because it's a tax-free situation as opposed to giving you wages. You get taxed on the dollars and then have to go buy something after tax.
What do you think the cumulative, let's talk about a couple of things. First of all, on the workforce itself, is this something we just don't know how it will affect? Now, you're an actuary, you deal with this all the time. The efficiency of the workforce, will this make us more efficient or less efficient, or is this just something we're going to have to wait and see?
I think it's probably a little bit of wait and see. Again, it's hard to say about the efficiency of the workforce. You do know that, again, though, the way people are being compensated through benefits is clearly changing. And again, I still think the linchpin that could change the entire system is the taxability of health insurance.
Say that again.
The fact that an employer gets to provide benefits on a tax-free basis through an employer health plan is a huge tax benefit. If I give you $1 to the employee, I can get $1 of health care through my employer for $1 because it's a tax-free benefit. The employer doesn't pay tax on it. The employee doesn't pay tax on it. If I have to give wages to people and send them to an insurance marketplace, now I'm only getting the tax-deducted value of that $1 to go buy what presumably is a more expensive insurance.
Now, does that make it more likely that employers will buy into it? Is that the incentive?
I think I think right now that's it. I think if you remove that, you would see a much more significant shift towards people sending people to the individual exchange. Right now, where a lot of people feared the idea that employers were just going to dump people onto the marketplace, for the most part, your larger employers are not going to do that. And that's somewhat employer
most large
specific.
employers already provide coverage, right?
That's right, they do, and it's still, even though the marketplace exists, it's still the most tax-efficient way for them to do it is through an employer plan.
Yeah. Now, let's go to one other point here. The kinds of coverage that they have to provide is now regulated, right? I mean, the nature of the coverage, not just you got to have it, but what's covered by it, is that all part of this change as well?
Absolutely. There's really two tests, and without getting into the details, what the employers have to do is provide coverage that's called minimum value and affordable.
Minimum value and affordable.
So affordability is just an income test. Now for an employer, it's very complicated because the income test technically is a household income test, which an employer doesn't always know what the household income of somebody is. The government's provided some safe harbors to guarantee it, but
it's a little complicated.
It's very complicated.
Yeah. Is it having any effect on the economic growth of the economy right now? Is it too early to tell?
I think that's still probably too early to tell. I mean, you probably get anecdotal evidence from different people that say, it makes it more difficult for me to hire additional people or things like that. But I think the jury's still out on that. But what we do know is it's certainly changing some full-time relationships towards the part-time.
And we also don't know, now we have a Republican control over the Senate. Republicans have said, look, there are changes we want to make. I don't think politically or governmentally, they're going to get a complete, removal of the Affordable Care Act. The president would veto it, but what changes? I mean, it's still possible that they could tweak some of this.
I think it's definitely true. And again, there's two completely different markets that are changing here. Most of what we've only felt so far is the individual insurance market, the marketplace, and that's a different market than even the employer marketplace is really a completely different market. And frankly, it's been unaffected by healthcare reform to this point, except for extra costs.
Thanks for coming in. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Have a great holiday and stay well.